Hello, everyone, and welcome to New Consciousness Review. I'm Miriam Knight, and our guest today is Ptolemy Tompkins, an American writer and contributing editor for Guideposts and Angels on Earth magazines. He is the author of 5 major books, including Paradise Fever, The Divine Life of Animals, and the focus of his writing, especially his latest book, The Modern Book of the Dead, is summed up quite elegantly in these words that I found on his website. Quote, I feel that spiritually speaking, I'm a genuine product of my time, and my time is, more than anything else, one where all the formerly separate spiritual traditions are crashing into one another, creating a situation in which all the members of the world's faiths are being called upon to rewrite themselves without compromising their core integrity. If the globalization of the world has done any good, it's in forcing people everywhere to come to terms with the sheer multiplicity of human belief and the need to ground one's own beliefs in a bedrock of tolerance for others, rather than knee-jerk denials or blanket condemnations. World history has in recent years been forcing us to just such a revisioning of our belief systems. And it's a revisioning we have to respond to not just within groups, but individually as well. Welcome, Ptolemy. I'm so pleased to have you, especially under the challenging conditions of your cold.
Yes, my cold and my flu, so God knows what you'll get out of me. Maybe it'll be...
maybe you'll rise to new heights of delirium.
Occasion.
Considering all the medications you've just downed in the effort to be on the show, anything can happen.
Absolutely.
Well, as we've heard from my introduction that I cadged from your website, you have a real elegant way with words, and I have to say I was very challenged in getting through your book before the interview, because I just wanted to linger and kind of go down all the rabbit holes that you brought up as you meandered through history. And yet I knew that I had to finish the book before our interview, and so I was very frustrated.
Well, there are an awful lot of places where I could sort of wander off, but I tell myself to stop because the subject is so enormous, and I have the benefit of being a specialist in none of the subjects at all. I mean, there's not a direction in which I'm not sort of going by the seat of my pants. I don't know enough about ancient Egypt. I don't know enough about ancient Rome or the Paleolithic, or history of Catholicism. You know, I'm basically a guy who's fascinated in the subject, but just doing my best to tell a story, and that makes for, you know, kind of running along with this plot and seeing all this other stuff going on that I could potentially run off with, but just saying, no, I want to tell a simple story. A simple story is really what a simple story made out of preposterously complex subject matter is what the goal of the book was. Like, this is so complex, but we need a simple story. We don't have one anymore.
I would venture to say that you have done a very fine job of pulling together narratives from all of these disparate sources and resources and weaving them into a fairly simple story, but a story that's embroidered with much side information that does enrich it. It's almost like Lectio Divina, that you have to be in the mood to really go with the flow. So let's get into the meat of the book. It's called The Modern Book of the Dead. So you reference both the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the Book of Thoth, which is the Egyptian recounting of what happens to us after we die. So why did you feel the need to write a more contemporary analysis of the afterlife?
Well, really, because I can't remember a time when I didn't. I grew up as my father wrote Secrets of the Great Pyramid and The Secret Life of Plants. I grew up in a very New Age atmosphere. And I can't remember a time when the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the Tibetan Book of the Dead weren't sitting around in various versions. And they always exercised kind of a pull on me. I would wander around my father's libraries, stare at this book or that, and often would not pick it up for, maybe a decade or so. But these books were real presences in my father's house. And when I did finally pick up both the Egyptian and the Tibetan Book of the Dead, what I was surprised to find a text that was very hard to penetrate. The translators, the various translators, both books have been brought into English in many different ways, and none of them are easy for completely different reasons. They are full of alien words, full of alien ideas. They are alien books from alien cultures, and they were written with the most salutary reasons in mind, helping people deal with the passage of death and telling them what happens, but they were not written for our culture. And what you had in the 60s was Timothy Leary and everybody gravitating to the Tibetan Book of the Dead because, wow, that's a groovy title. And then you have all these people trying to piece their way through it and make it fit their lives. And I argue in my book somewhere that trying to find out what happens when you die by consulting a book produced thousands of years ago in ancient Egypt is like sending away to ancient Egypt for a map to New Jersey. The death that you and I are going to die is right here where we are. And do we really need to import these incredibly exotic concepts, or are we being lazy in not coming up with ones of our own? It seems to me the really respectful way to react, to relate to the after-death text of another culture is not to just study it carefully in a scholarly way. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But those texts exist because the people who produced them took the afterlife seriously. They weren't messing around. They weren't sort of, novelty books or anything like that. They were maps to negotiate the single most consequential thing that will happen to any of us. And it does a disservice to a book like that to merely look at it as a museum piece. What a cool idea, what a neat thing. What those books really ask for from us is that we come up with our own. We take what they say with seriousness, and then we ask, is this right for us, or do we need to make a few changes? What do we believe about the life after death? Do we believe in it? Can we take it seriously? And that's sort of partially how my book came to be.
So what would you say are the key differences between the Egyptian, the Asian, and really the Judeo-Christian visions of the afterlife?
Well, when I was writing this book, it occurred to me that here I am trying to write a book sort of tailored so that nobody will like it.
Offend everyone.
Yeah. It's just got something to irritate everyone because Christians aren't going to like it because even though my perspective is to some degree Christian, it's not, 100% down the line Christian at all. I have a lot of Buddhist friends. My stepbrother's a Buddhist, and they're going to be put off because I suggest that there are aspects of the Buddhist point of view that are not good enough, that are not good for us today in the modern world. It's going to annoy New Agers because I love the New Age, but I criticize the New Age for not being as smart as it should be a lot of the time. In the way that Catholics are sort of allowed to make fun of Catholicism, I see myself as allowed to make fun of the New Age because it's really what I am. Mm-hmm. It's how I grew up. My dad spent all his money looking for Atlantis when I was 12 years old. I had a waterbed when I was in 5th grade. There are pyramids and all that kind of stuff. But, New Agers, typically I don't think will like it, because I get mad at the New Age for not having for not taking all of this stuff sufficiently seriously. I mean, there should be no more serious book in the world than one which tells you what's going to happen when you die and what you need to do to orient yourself to that. I mean, what's more serious? And a lot of the New Age volumes on the subject, I just see have this sort of smiley, soft fuzziness to them, but they don't really attack the problem with the directness that I think the subject matter demands. So anyhow, I have all these sort of little complaints against everybody, but at the same time, when I was writing it, I kept, there's a philosopher and writer named Ken Wilber, who I'm sure you know. Mm-hmm. I kept a saying of his in mind when I was writing it, and that is that nobody is wrong 100% nobody is wrong 100% of the time. So that while I was taking parts of all these different views to task, I was also saying, but a lot of them are also right. And the reason they're right is because fundamentally they're describing the same geography. And it's a geography which is real, but it's not real in the nuts and bolts way that, New Jersey is real, or, the Lincoln Tunnel is real. But it is an actual geography. However, it demands a kind of approach that we're not used to. There is an afterlife. Things do happen to you when you die, but they are not like the things that happen to us when we're alive. That was basically my approach. What happens, in my view, is extremely complicated, but what is needed is a simple view of it. Krishnamurti once said, life is extremely complex, but we have to approach it simply. I think in the introduction, Krishnamurti said that about life. It's true. It's also true about death. Death is enormously complex, but we should approach it simply. And that's what many cultures previous to ours did. They had simple stories to allow the person to make basic sense of it. And we don't have such a story today, and I think we need it. And that's what my book tries to provide.